See at the top of your sheet, the joy of Purim, costumes, spiels, and practical jokes. And what I want to talk about is why we have a great emphasis on simcha, on joy, in Purim specifically, and the extremes to which it takes us in terms of the specific manifestations, costumes, spiels, practical jokes, and the way in which we actually pursue this, even, it seems, at the expense of halacha in certain circumstances. So we're going to find out the why for these things, why we do these things, and we'll also find out the why not, which seems to be overridden in popular minhag. And as always, as with all shiurim, please feel free to interrupt me. If I end up speaking for 45 minutes straight, my throat's going to hurt. So please chime in. In general, the development of joy is part of every Yom Tov. Every celebration that we have, every event that we mark, that we call a Yom Tov, generally involves simcha. We have a mitzvah of Simchas Yom Tov. That refers specifically to the Shalosh Regalim, the three Yom Tovim, Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot. Some debate regarding extending that beyond. Is there a Shabbos element? Is there not a Shabbos element? But in general, we have this mitzvah of Simchas Yom Tov, of joy on Yom Tov, and the Gemara asks, what does that mean? How do we celebrate Yom Tovim with joy? What's the joy we're supposed to have on Yom Tov? And it explains you're supposed to buy things for different members of the family based on what they enjoy. So it mentions buying meat and wine. It mentions buying nice clothing. The Gemara in Pesachim says you're supposed to make sure that everyone is going to be happy. As the pasuk says, "V'samachta b'chagecha," you shall be happy on your Yom Tov. In addition, specific Yom Tovim, specific holidays, have their own special simcha elements. So on Pesach, for example, we act as royalty, and we recline at the table, we roast the Korban Pesach. When we have a Korban Pesach, we wear fine clothing, we set the table beautifully. In honor of the occasion, it's supposed to create a certain mood. Sukkot, known as Zman Simchasenu, the time of our joy, certainly involves ways in which we try to build simcha, to build joy. In the Beis HaMikdash, you have a Simchas Beis HaShoeva. The Beis HaShoeva itself didn't have to be joyous. Beis HaShoeva, literally the place in which you draw water, is a reference to the practice of pouring water on the Mizbeach during Sukkot. You had a special mitzvah during certain days of the Chag, certain days of the holiday, to pour water on the Mizbeach, but they turned that into this great occasion of revelry where you had jugglers, and not just any jugglers. They're not juggling little blue rubber balls in the air. They're juggling torches. There's singing, there's dancing, this great big celebration. And we have a theme of Chetzio Lachem, Chetzio Lashem on Yom Tovim, that they should be half for you and half for Hashem. There's a whole debate regarding Rosh Hashanah about how joyous you're supposed to be. But we're taught that we have special foods in order to increase our feelings of joy and confidence going into Yom Hadin, the day of judgment. The theme of Simcha in general permeates our Yom Tov and permeates our holidays. But when it comes to Purim, we go above and beyond. Now, before I talk about going above and beyond on Purim, I want to mention one other case in which we go above and beyond for joy for a different holiday, because we're going to see themes that we're going to discover regarding Purim as well. And that is a practice from Sukkot. If you take a look in source number 1, Mishnah in Sukkah, talks about Hoshana Rabbah. Hoshana Rabbah, the 7th day of the holiday of Sukkot, the last day on which you fulfill the mitzvah of the lulav and esrog. So at the end, when you finish the mitzvah, the Mishnah describes what would happen. Miyad, immediately, hatinokos shomtin es lulavehen va'ochlin esrogehen. Tinokos here does not mean babies. My pediatrician's wondering how many babies are picking up a lulav and esrog. Tinokos in Mishnaic and Gemara terminology can often mean young children. So immediately when they finish the mitzvah, hatinokos shomtin es lulavehen, the children would release their lulavim, va'ochlin esrogehen, and they would eat their esrogim. I mean, today we cook it, make it into esrog jelly, esrog liqueur. Evidently they had no problem just taking a bite out of the esrog. Okay, that's what they did. And that's what the kids would do after the mitzvahs were over. But take a look at Rashi and the explanations that he offers for what would actually happen. Miyad, source number 2, Tinoko Shomten es Lulaveyen, he says it's not what it sounds like. that the kids release their lulavim and eat their esrogim, but rather, hagedolim shomtin es lulvei haketanim miyadam b'shvi'i. The adults would remove the lulavim of the children from their hands on the 7th, v'ochlin esrogehen shel tinokos, and they would eat the esrogim of the children. You've heard the expression, taking candy from a baby? So this is taking an esrog from a child. What are you doing? How can you do that? That's not nice. He says, no, don't worry. There's no issue of theft. There isn't even an issue of peaceful conduct. And what Rashi means by that is that sometimes a person doesn't have legal right of ownership. A child doesn't own the esrog. So technically, if I steal it from him, that's not called theft, but it's still prohibited because of darkei shalom. That's not a good way to behave. You're just going to cause strife if you take things from small children. So please don't do that. So he says, that's not a concern here. For they did this in simcha, they did it out of joy. So since it would increase the joy of the Yom Tov, therefore it was okay to take lulavim and esrogim from small children and bite into the esrogim. This is strange. What makes it even stranger is the Midrash in Vayikra Rabbah, source number 3. I wanted to translate it, but then I realized that would then have more than a double-sided page. They ended up Xeroxing on 2 pages, so I really could have actually ended up going further, but I didn't know that that was going to happen at the time. So I'll read out and translate. It's a great story. You've heard these stories before. The stories of the really righteous person who gives all his money away for some mitzvah or for tzedakah, and then he can't go home because he has no money, and then he wanders off somewhere and some nace happens to him and he perhaps travels to a faraway land. We're familiar with accounts like this within the Midrash of one kind or another. Here is one of those cases, but it's not as well known. There's a certain fellow, he's known as somebody who gives a lot to tzedakah. So Chadzman, one day, b'yom Hoshana, it happened to be Hoshana Rabbah, Yavi into say Asara Polsin, his wife gave him 10 coins. Amrolo, and she said, Ho Gezavin livnach klum min shuka, go buy something from your kids from the market. It's Hoshana Rabbah, Shmini Atzeres is coming. The Gemara says she knows you're supposed to buy things for your family in honor of Yom Tov. Here are 10 coins, go buy something. He got out into the marketplace. BAYT.Center. The tzedakah collectors met him. Amri, they said, the person of the mitzvahs is coming down the road. This is great, our lucky day. Amrulo, they said to him, they said, listen, we're marrying off an orphan girl. Please help us out. We're trying to buy one musical instrument to play at her wedding. Please give your share for the mitzvah. And he says, oh, great opportunity. Nasav Ilain Yud Polsin, V'yav Yashon Alahon. He took his 10 coins and he gave it to them to use for the mitzvah. But now he's embarrassed. He can't go home because he has nothing to offer. He goes to the shul. He saw the esrogim that the kids played with on Hoshana Rabbah after they had finished the mitzvah. We've learned there, and the quote that we just gave, the releasing of the lulavim, the eating of the esrogim, nasav minhon, he took the esrogim from the kids. Just like Rashi talked about. He took the esrogim from the kids. Umala yasaka, and he filled up a sack with these esrogim. Now I'm going to short-circuit the rest since I didn't give you the translation on the sheet and just tell you the rest of the story. We have a lot to get to still today. But he fills up his sack. He goes off to sea with this sack of esrogim. He arrives in a certain land where the king has been very ill. And the physicians have told the king that your cure will be if you take one of these esrogim the Jews use for their mitzvah and you eat the esrog. So he arrives in the land. He doesn't know anything about that. The king's men are searching throughout the land trying to find an esrog. They can't find an esrog. He's sitting under a tree with his sack. And one of the king's men comes by and says, what's in that sack? And he says, nothing, just some esrogim. Esrogim! And they take the esrog, the king eats it, the king is cured, and the king empties out his sack of the esrogim and fills it with money, and the man is able to go home again. There's a great follow-up to this story. This Midrash goes on for quite a while, but this Midrash, which Rashi actually cites in the discussion, seems to sanction the practice of taking the kids esrogim. And this doesn't seem to bother us, because it's all in good fun. It's in the pursuit of simcha. Now, I am not going to explain tonight why it is that that's justified for Sukkot. But I am going to explain why that's justified for Purim, because we're going to see that theme over and over again regarding Purim. that Purim will become known for its simcha and even for justifying bad behavior. Perhaps the most famous example of justifying bad behavior on Purim is the story of Rabbi and Rabbi Zera. Right? Remember the story of Rabbi and Rabbi Zera? The Gemara in Megillah says, Chayav inish levasume v'poria ad lo yada ben arar haman lebarach Mordechai. One should become basum. I'm going to say it as intoxicated. There are all sorts of nice extra explanations that are offered, but the core idea is that one should reach the point on Purim where he can't tell the difference between cursed is Haman and blessed is Mordechai. He gets so confused. And yes, I absolutely warn people every single year to be very, very careful with this mitzvah, particularly around small children. The children do not understand the concept of drinking once a year. They do not understand the concept of intoxication once a year. And adults have to be very careful about the lessons their children take away from the practice of this mitzvah. Having said that, the Gemara seems very clear when it brings the story of Rabbi and Rabbi Zera sitting together at the Purim Seuda, and Rabbi gets so livasume that he actually come Rabbi v'shachtei l'Rabbi Zera, which taking it literally means he killed Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera comes back to life and declines to attend the Seuda again the following year. It's clear we're talking about reaching a stage of what I would consider inappropriate behavior, and yet it's justified in the name of the joy of Yom Tov. Why is joy so critical to Purim? And we mentioned it in the Megillah, that the Jews had light and they had joy. But why is it that joy is so important for Purim that we're going to use it to justify what happens at the Seuda of Rabbi and Rabbi Zera, and to justify a whole bunch of other questionable practices that we're going to mention? Why is joy so important in the celebration of Purim? Couldn't I just read the Megillah, send some gifts to somebody else, eat a Seuda, give matanos lavyonim, give gifts to the poor? I fulfilled all 4 mitzvahs of the day. What do I need to have joy for? Your turn. Yeah.
Maybe it's sort of akin to actually feeling as if we left Mitzrayim on Pesach. We have to sort of feel the story, not just read the Megillah.
Mm-hmm. Right. Part of it, I think, is there's a sense of reenactment for us to really experience the nace. Like we say in the Haggadah, Chayav Adam Liros es Atzmo, Kilu Yatz Mitzrayim. You have to see yourself as though you left Mitzrayim, and we build on that, the Rambam's edition, Laharos es Atzmo, to demonstrate as though you had left Mitzrayim. But there you have a pasuk. You have a biblical mitzvah that we associate with that. Here, the Chachamim are creating something. Why are they creating this mandate of joy? We don't do it for Hanukkah. We don't create a mandate of you must feel simcha on Hanukkah. We do it for Purim. What's the difference? Yeah.
There is a pasuk, albeit that it's from the Megillah.
Yeah.
It says, so you made the simcha.
Right.
So having fulfilled the 4 mitzvahs that you said, without fulfilling that would not necessarily be. So maybe the question you're asking is, so why is it in the Megillah?
Right, so why is it in the Megillah?
But
yeah.
That's the answer.
Oh no, it's true. 100% true. Esther and Mordechai, when they set this up, say you should have simcha. Absolutely. But why? What's the rationale for it? I think it's important to look at this in the context of the events of Purim themselves and the history when Purim takes place. Is there a Beit HaMikdash during the time of Purim? I'm getting a lot of no's. Any yeses? Sorry?
They started
Yeah, you're right. You're right. There's sort of a Beis HaMikdash. They started, as the Midrash explains, trying to fit in the chronology of Purim to all the various Dariuses and Cyruses of the Persians and the Medes and the Babylonians. We're taught that this occurs, the story occurs after Koresh, after Cyrus the Persian has permitted the Jews to come back and build the second Beis HaMikdash. The building has begun and Achashverosh has halted it. So you're sort of at a stage where you have a second Beis HaMikdash, second temple, but not quite there. That's when this story happens. This is a moment of a historic low for Jewry, because Geula has begun, redemption has begun, and then it's halted. It's cut short. And if you remember the words of Zechariah Hanavi, Zechariah speaking to the Jews of that era, he says, you can't give up. He says, Mi baz liyom ketanot, who is it who will degrade this day of small things? It's true, we haven't yet achieved everything, but we have something. Zechariah reminds the Jews. We're back in Israel to the extent that we're able to be there. It's true that not all the Jews came out of Bavel. Only 42,000 roughly came out of Bavel. It's true you only have 120-something Levium, but we have a start. It's true that this building that we're building isn't frankly the stuff of miracles. You don't see the Nisim, the miracles of the first Beis HaMikdash and the second Beis HaMikdash, but we have the possibility of building a Beis HaMikdash. It's been stalled, but it's going to happen. And Zechariah is trying to get the Jews to stop giving up hope, for them to see the potential in the quasi-geula, the quasi-redemption that they have. Into this comes the Purim story. We just started our almost geula, our almost redemption. And now, along came Achashverosh, he halted the building. And now along came Haman. And he's trying to get Achashverosh to wipe us out. What happened to the Geula? What happened to the redemption? What happened to us returning and all that? Where did it all go? And morale sinks to a low that I can't even imagine. And so along come Esther and Mordechai at this moment of the nadir of the morale of the Jewish people. And when they're saved, they say, this is something that's important to spread, not just for future generations, for them to reenact it, but for the Jews of their own day, to experience simcha, to experience encouragement, for them to feel that, yes, we have been redeemed. This isn't only a partial geula, it's a full geula, it's a full redemption. And so we find a great emphasis on simcha, on joy, and in the practices of ensuing generations, we find an emphasis on creating that joy even at the expense, sometimes, of significant halachic concerns. And that brings us to the first of the three minhagim that we're going to talk about, and that's the Purim costume. The Purim costume is apparently rather old. How old it is a good question, but we know that it is at least 700 years old as a Jewish practice. You don't find it in the Gemara. You don't find it mentioned among the Gaonim. But take a look at source number 4. Rabbeinu Clonimus ben Clonimus describing the practice in Provence in the beginning of the 14th century. I didn't bring you the Hebrew. I didn't transcribe it off of the Hebrew text that I have. But he writes, and on the 14th of Adar, for the sake of honor and beauty, young men are glorified and exalted, acting in a manner of insanity and foolishness. He's not praising it. He's not happy about this, in case anyone was wondering. One wears a woman's dress and a necklace about his throat. One acts like one of the fools with a drum and a dance and joy. He describes this celebration with abandon, including the men wearing dresses and necklaces. Rabbeinu Moshe HaKohen, writing in 14th century Germany, mentions this practice as well. This practice of dressing up, wearing a costume, has many possible roots. What are the classic explanations for why we dress up on Purim? Sorry? Hester Panim, to demonstrate that Hashem was hidden. That's one, yes? V'na'afochu in the sense of?
The sense of flipping, like being someone.
Right.
Not.
Right, a reversal.
Here, reversing, right.
Right, a reversal. There's a sociologist by the name of Jeffrey Rubenstein who wrote an article called Purim, Liminality, and Communitas. And I thought it was phenomenal. He talked about the costume practice, the way an anthropologist would look at it. And he said that it's part of a liminal festival, a rite of passage. You want to show you've gone from one state to another, and you erase your old identity, and you gain a new identity. And that the mask serves that role. It's pretty deep. It's an interesting idea. Other explanations? Take a look at the Gemara that I brought here on the sheet, source number 5. I didn't translate the whole thing. I only translated part in order to save space, but I'll do it now. Shalu Talmidav es Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's students asked him a question. Why was it that the Jews of that period, the Gemara does not want to word it this way, to say it in a negative way, so it says the enemies of the Jews. Why is it that the enemies of the Jews in those days deserved destruction? Meaning the Jews themselves. Amar lahem, to which he replied, Imru atem, you answer me. Amru lo, to which the student said, Mibnei shenenu misu'udaso shel oso rasha. Because they ate from Achashverosh's feast, the feast which the Gemara explains was meant to celebrate the downfall of the Jews. Im Kain, Shebeshushan Yehargu, in which Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai comes back to them and says, in that case, the Jews of Shushan should be punished. They're the ones who eat at the Seuda, Shebechol Olam Kulo Al Yehargu, but not the Jews in the rest of the world. So he says to them, your reason doesn't work. So Amrulo, Moratas, they say, okay, so you tell us. Why are you turning to us with the, for the answer? You know the answer. So Amar Lahem, he replies, it's because the Jews bowed to the idol. That's why. Amrulo, to which the students say, in that case, how is it that they're allowed to survive? They worshipped idols. Why is God showing favor to them at all? Amar Lahem, to which he replied, Heim lo asu el lepanim, Afakadosh Baruch Hu lo asu imahen el lepanim. The Jews only participated for show. They didn't accept the idols of Achashverosh. They were only doing it as an act. So they only did it for show. So Hashem said also, I'm going to do something with you for show. I'm going to pretend that I'm about to destroy you. Ha ha ha. That's Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's answer. And so we borrow from that and say it's a Yom Tov, which is for show. There's an outward and then there's an inward. There's what's going on publicly, sort of like the Hester Panim theme. There's what's going on publicly, and then there's what's going on behind the scenes. There's the mask, and then there's that which is behind it. And that's another reason why the masks are worn. Another reason why the masks are worn is really not about masks. You notice that he didn't mention masks. In the source from Clonimus ben Clonimus, he didn't mention masks at all, right? He mentioned costumes. And another source ties it into the costumes themselves. If you look at the psukim I excerpted from Megillas Esther in source number 6, we realize that much of the Megillah centers around changes of clothing. And really, the key points in the story do. So examples here, right? Mordechai hears about the decree of Haman, and he knows all that has happened. He tears his garments. He wears sackcloth and ashes. He goes to the king's gate wearing sackcloth. And remember that Esther tries to send him new clothing for him to wear. You can't wear that. And he says, no, I'm wearing sackcloth and ashes. And then on the other hand, at the end of the story, everything turns around. He puts on instead royal garments. There's this transition in the clothing. The clothing demonstrates the feelings that go on through the story. Then there are many more examples of clothing in the story. There's the clothing that Esther wears to go to Achashverosh. We get great detail when you have Esther in the first stage about all the dressing up that she does when she first goes to Achashverosh. But then again in Perek Hey, in the 5th chapter, when she goes to Achashverosh to win him over to the side of the Jews, we have Haman changing clothing, right? His pre-party downfall, or that which fell down upon him, and then the way in which he has to change his clothing to go to the party with Esther, and so on. There are all sorts of explanations that are given. My daughter Rena came home from school last year with an explanation that I hadn't heard before, that the reason for the costumes is because this was so that Haman wouldn't know who was Jewish. In other words, if everybody's dressing up, Haman won't be able to tell who the Jews are. But at the end of the day, after we give all of the explanations, the halachic authorities all write it off as simcha. They say the reason for the costumes is in order to increase joy. You have the surprised laughter of the unusual, the joy that comes perhaps with being somewhat lightheaded. That's what we see in the discussion about the Purim costumes, because the poskim, the halachic authorities, dealt with two major problems involved in wearing costumes. One problem involved in wearing costumes is that sometimes people wore shatnez, wool and linen, as part of the costumes. You're not allowed to wear wool and linen. So how are you doing it as part of your Purim costume? That was one problem. The second problem, if you go back and look at Rabbeinu Clonimus ben Clonimus again in source number 4, is that the men are wearing dresses. What are you doing wearing a woman's dress? What are you talking about? Don't you know there's a biblical prohibition, lo yilbash gever simlas isha? A man is not allowed to wear a woman's garment. What in the world does he think he's doing? Take a look at source number 7, the Rambam, and his description of this mitzvah. Lo sade isha ade ish, a woman should not put men's garments on herself, such as by placing on a man's hat or a turban, wearing armor or similar things, shaving her head as a man would. Interesting. V'lo yadeh ish edei isha. And a man should not put on women's garments. Kegon sheyilbash bigdei tziv'onin. He shouldn't wear colored garments or gold ornaments in places where only women wear such things. That's what he says. And he says, Hakol Kaminig HaMedina, it's all based on local practice. But he doesn't like the idea of men putting on women's garments. It's actually a biblical prohibition. So how is it that you can do that at all? Yes?
Does the local practice take precedence?
Meaning?
So if you're in a place like, Morocco, way back,
Yeah.
they were wearing more, I guess, robes that were something more feminine looking.
Right.
So would that take precedence then? Because that would be the local practice?
Yeah, I think so. I think he's given us the definition and said it's now up to each place to define what is men's clothing and what is women's clothing. Yes, I believe so. The discussion came up over the centuries, and actually most recently several decades ago, in the discussion about men and earrings, where people would say, well, you can't wear an earring because earrings are what women wear, but if you open up your chumash, you find men are wearing earrings. It's definitely something that changes based on the venue.
Is this something the Rambam was referring to just for a Avodah?
Right, so that's the question. There might be a heter for this based on the difference between the Rambam stance and what we're going to read now in source number 8 on the top of the second side. Rabbi Yoel Sirkis, writing in the 17th century in his BAYT, which is his commentary on the Torah, a code of law, says Yesh heter b'shnei devarim. There might be two ways in which we could permit for men to wear a woman's garment. Ha'echad she'ein isur afilu b'davar shu noi v'kishut elam kein b'isha halaveshes bigdei ish lihis damos leish v'ish halavesh bigdei isha lihis damos leisha. He says it could be the prohibition is only where you wear the garment in order to masquerade as someone of the opposite gender. You want to look like the opposite gender, to pass as someone from that gender. But if you're outside, it's very, very hot, and the only thing you can use to shield yourself from the sun happens to be a woman's hat, you'd be allowed to put it on. It's not something where you're trying to masquerade. It's just a matter of convenience. V'asheni, and he says second, it also may only involve matters of types of clothing that are made for beauty or for ornamentation. And what's going on where the Rambam says flat, off limits, and Rabbi Yoel Sirkis says not so fast, is a basic debate that Lazer was pointing to about the definition of the prohibition. According to the Rambam, this has been developed many times over by various authorities. According to the Rambam, the prohibition is against idolatry. The practice of idolatrous priests was that they would channel various forces that they considered masculine forces or forces they considered feminine forces through the clothing that they wore, and they would put on a garment of one gender or the other in order to symbolize and draw these forces to themselves. So according to the Rambam, it doesn't matter whether you're pretending to be a man or whether you're just wearing a man's garment, or whether you're pretending to be a woman or just wearing a woman's garment. It doesn't make a difference because it's all idolatrous. And therefore the Rambam says it's all out. The Bach, Rabbi Yoel Sirkis, says that's not the issue. It's not about idolatry. It's about lewdness. The concern is the man is going to try to pass himself off as a woman in order to gain access to places and to people he shouldn't be gaining access to. That's our concern. The man is trying to mix among women as a woman. The woman is trying to mix among men as a man. That's his real consideration. So if you're just wearing one garment out of, for protection from the sun, or you're not trying to pass yourself as the opposite gender, the Bach, Rabbi Yoel Sirkis, has no problem with the idea. So based on that, we get the permission for the Purim costume even when it's from the opposite gender. If you take a look at source number 9, the Ma'ari Mintz, Rabbi Yehuda Mintz, he says, Kevin she'eno mechavein leni'uf ela l'simchas Purim. He says, if a person's wearing this not for immorality, he's wearing it for the joy of Purim. That's something I'm going to come back to. I'm not ready to discuss the theft point that he mentions in here just yet. He says they're not concerned. Really, it happens Purim night, it happens Purim day, maybe it happens the night after Purim, leading into Shushan Purim. He says it's not a big deal. People are just doing it for the sake of joy. So the joy is a critical factor. He doesn't say they're wearing costumes because of the Nafal within the Megillah. He doesn't say they're wearing costumes because of liminality and transition. He doesn't say it's because you want to hide who's Jewish or Hester Panim and hiding it. He says you're wearing costumes in order for people to feel joy on the day. That's what it's all about. As far as Mari Mintz and the other halachic authorities who discuss the issue are concerned with, they say that's why we wear costumes. All the other explanations are very nice explanations. They are Torah also, but at the end of the day, it's really about the joy, and the joy is sufficient to justify the costume, even though it's against the Rambam for sure. We can turn to the Bach and say, okay, fine, we'll go with it. That's the Purim costume. You have a question, or you're just thinking? Okay. The second practice, the Purim Spiel. So the Purim Spiel, the earliest form of the celebration, according to Daniel Sperber in his Minhagim works, goes all the way back to, at the latest, the early 5th century, possibly earlier. The Jews would burn Haman in effigy. They would actually display him hung, like in the Megillah, and then they would burn this effigy of Haman. It doesn't appear to have started out as a Jewish practice. It seems that it was something that, in general, nations did at their celebrations. They burned their enemy in effigy, and we borrowed it. Emperor Theodosius banned the practice among Jews in the Roman Empire in the early 5th century because he felt that it was mocking Christianity, because there were certain Christian elements that actually made it into this effigy that was being burned for obvious reasons. But the practice continued anyway, because you really can't ban something like this. It doesn't work. The Jews kept on doing it in any case, so that if you take a look at source number 10, Rabbeinu Nassan Baal HaAruch. Rabbeinu Nassan Baal HaAruch is not nearly well known enough. Rabbeinu Nassan Baal HaAruch wrote a dictionary, but it wasn't just any dictionary. You see, Rabbeinu Nassan Baal HaAruch precedes Rashi. He is in many ways our first Parshan on the Gemara, our first explainer of the Gemara, because what he did was he created an Aramaic dictionary. Each entry is called an erech. The work itself is called the aruch, and he presents roots of words, and he explains them using passages from the Gemara. In the same way that when you see a dictionary, will sometimes mention a word, and they'll give you a quote, some passage where that word was used. So he'll take a passage of the Gemara, and then he'll actually explain it. And what he does, because of who he is, he's writing in the 10th century, the end of the Gaonic period, he's really teaching us Gemara at a time when even Rashi isn't around yet. So the Aruch becomes a very valuable tool in his day and since then for learning Torah. So take a look at what he writes in his entry Shin Vav Vav Reish. Why that's associated with this is another discussion, but he says, on the days of Purim, the global custom is for young men to make an image of Haman and suspend it from the roofs for 4 or 5 days. And then on Purim to make a bonfire and throw the image into it. They stand around it and sing, and they have a ring suspended above the fire, and people jump through from one side of the fire to the other. That's a Purim party. That's what they were doing. The practice actually ended up circulating to other holidays as well. So that it was done on Sukkot too at one point. It was done on Hanukkah as well. They would burn the leftover oil from the menorahs. That's your first earliest big communal Purim celebration. Eventually, you get a second type of a celebration, which I think is more familiar to us, and that's the Purim Spiel. It seems to have started in Germany in the 15th century. The Germans had their own similar practice called the Fastnachtspiel. I hope I'm not mispronouncing that. Where they had a jester get up, and the jester would sing and recite poetry and all that. And that's what we did. For our spiel, you would have people make up skits. The skits were based on the Purim story or based on others from Tanakh. But surprise, that quickly morphed into spiels instead that would mock people from the community, and in particular, the community leaders. The practice spread into Poland. It spread from there into northern Italy. The first Yiddish one on record is from the year 1555. The jokes are still funny. It then eventually became not just a spiel, a skit, but a monologue. I know exactly how that happened as a former Shul rabbi. The answer is they went looking for volunteers. They only found one guy who was willing to do it, so it went from becoming a spiel and a skit to being a monologue. But the practice continued to spread, and actually the yeshivos used it as a way to fundraise. They would go from house to house and put on these spiels. in the houses and collect tzedakah. Eventually, somewhere around the 18th century, you get the practice of the Purim Rav. And then when you hear of the Purim Rav, you spend time in Yeshiva, you hear about the Purim Rav. It's still very popular in Israel in particular. It's not as old as the Purim Spiel. It's somewhere around the 18th century. But basically what you would do is you would set somebody up as a speaker, as a darshan, and he would speak as though he's giving a Dvar Torah, a shir, a drasha, parodying the style of whoever the usual speaker is, whoever the usual darshan is. It was meant to be a parody, and he would present mock divrei Torah. The Sephardim, when they heard about this in the 18th century, were incensed, and they condemned the practice. This did not catch on well in the Sephardic community. They felt that it was disrespectful, and in fact, it is disrespectful. Hey, when you get down to it, what in the world are we talking about? Skits making fun of community leaders, the parodies of the darshan. How in the world do we justify the practice? Take a look at source number 11. It's a Gemara in Bava Metzia. Kol hayordim legehenim olim. Anybody who descends to Gehenna, the place of punishment after death, still can get out, can also ascend. Chutz mishlosha, except for 3 types of people, sheyordin ve'ein olin. They go down and they do not come up. Ve'elu hein, and the following are the 3. Haba'al eishes ish, one who lives with another's wife. V'hamalvim pnei chavero berabim, and somebody who humiliates somebody else in public, literally whitens his face in public. V'amechaneh shem ra lachavero, and someone who makes up a bad nickname for somebody else. To which the Gemara asked, well, isn't that embarrassing the person? It's the same thing. Mechana hainu malbin, isn't that the same thing as embarrassing the person? No, I didn't put this in the translation, but it's in the Hebrew. Avagav the dash bay bishmei. No, the answer is, even when he's so used to the name that he doesn't get white anymore over it, doesn't feel great shame, nonetheless, he still can't use it. That's what he's saying. But we see the weight that we place on not embarrassing others in public. How in the world are we justifying the Purim spiel? And the answer, quoted once again by the poskim who permit it, is it's all for simcha. It's all for joy. Our pursuit of joy on Purim is so all-encompassing that we're willing to justify the practice. And then the third minhag, the practical joke. The origin for this one is ancient as well. They talk about charging at other people, as in a joust. People would actually do this. This was a celebration on Purim. It also comes up interestingly regarding Hoshana Rabbah. When making the hakafos around the bima, somebody waiting for somebody else to come along and tripping him or otherwise attacking him, catching him as he's coming around the bend. But it comes up particularly on Purim, as well as the practice of taking other people's property and saying, well, it's all a joke. Taking the person's clothing, taking the person's stuff, and saying, well, it was all in good fun. Take a look, please, at the sheet at source number 12, and the words of the Ramah, Rabbi Moshe Isserles. And he is quoting the Maharim Mintz. This is what we had in source number 9, is what Rabbi Moshe Isserles is quoting here. I didn't explain it fully in number 9 because we weren't ready to talk about theft. But he says, B'nei Adam ha'chotim zemi zeh derech simcha. People who grab from each other in a manner of joy, ein bazeh mishum lo tigzol. That's not in violation of the law against theft. V'no'ag ukach. People do it. As long as you don't break any municipal ordinances. We'll allow it. This is okay. He's basing it on Maharim Mintz. If you take a look back at source number 9, that's the quote, where he said, so too in our case, he's talking about the case of dressing and the clothing of the opposite gender. One does not intend to wear this for immorality, but rather to enhance the joy of Purim. Therefore, just as they did not erect a fence, meaning a prohibition, regarding theft, since it is only for 2 nights in a day, we just do it a couple of days a year, so too here, regarding the dress-up. Theft and adultery emerge from the same root in a person's nature. They weren't bothered about the theft issue. They're also not bothered about the potential immorality issue. So his statement, Maharim Mintz's statement, which the Ramah quotes as law, is that it's all for fun. Now I should note, source 13, Rabbi Yechiel Michal Epstein was the Rav in Novardok about 110 years ago. And he said, not necessarily. If somebody gets hurt in one of these games, you do have to pay. He says, Misha hizik chayav l'shalem. You harmed somebody else, you do have to pay for it. Why? Because now, in our great sin, due to our great sins, joy has been dimmed. We're not on that level. Really, the joy that we feel, in our living in Poland in the beginning of the 20th century, we're not such happy people. If we're gonna, if someone's going to do this, he's going to have to pay for it. Now, when I say that the Chachamim permitted all of these actions because we believe in this all-encompassing purpose of joy on Purim, like the Jews who are living in this quasi-Geula state, who are feeling such depression, you should know that the Chachamim were definitely torn on it, and they did want this to be brought under control. If you take a look at source 14, you find what the Ramah wrote in Choshen Mishpat, the section of the Code of Jewish Law that deals with financial law. He says, Bachurim harochvim likras chasan v'kala v'hiziku zeh et zeh mamona chavero derech simcha uschot. He says, young men, I didn't translate the whole thing, I'm reading it out now. He says, young men who ride out to greet the bride and groom, and they harm each other, they harm each other's property in the matter of joy and laughter, or for any other matter of joy, since that's what they do, they're exempt. However, if it appears to the Beit Din, if it appears to the local court that it's time to make rules about this, that it's getting out of hand, they have the ability to do so. They shouldn't say, well, it's the custom, everybody does it, everyone's always done it, therefore we're going to let everybody have carte blanche. He says the Beit Din may well need to make a decree about this. The Vilna Gaon, writing on that spot, said, yes, there is definitely a need for a takana, for an enactment against this. The Shalah, Rabbi Shaya Horowitz was against it. It's quoted in the Be'er Heitev. We definitely say that one should be very, very careful. Not that joy isn't worthy, but there's always this concern for where it might lead. If you take a look in source 15, the Rambam writes, Asur lignov kol shehu din Torah. He says, biblically, you're not allowed to steal anything. V'asur lignov derech schok, you can't steal in the manner of playing either. O lignov al manas lahachzir, you can't take things and say, well, I'm going to give it back. O lignov al manas l'shalem, you can't steal something and say, well, that's okay, I'm going to pay for it. Hakol asur, all of it is asur, including these last practices. Why? Shelo yargil atzmo bekach, so that a person doesn't accustom himself to do this. So the Rambam is telling me that as a general rule, you're not allowed to do things that are going to harm others, even if you say it's a joke, because it could lead you into down a dangerous road. We say, well, Purim, it's only a day, it's only a couple of days, a day and a couple of nights, and it's for joy, and we really want joy on Purim. Therefore, we're going to look the other way for this. But still, there's a need to be very, very careful in this regard. So to summarize what we said, number one, we pointed out the general role of simcha, of joy on Yom Tov throughout the year, the way that it's a theme in all of our happy celebrations. But we pointed out, that even on Sukkot, we're apparently willing to go further with this act of stealing the kids' esrogim and eating the esrogim, this practice which seems to be so accepted that we can even have a story about this pious man who gave tzedakah and went and he gave his family's last coins to tzedakah, and then he went and stole esrogim. The same justifications that, while it's for fun, show up to a great extent regarding Purim in terms of this issue of intoxication on Purim, in terms of the costumes, which for all the explanations that we gave, it seems bottom line that they're really there to increase joy, and such that we're willing to justify shatnez, we're willing to justify wearing clothes of the opposite gender. It works for the Purim spiels, even though there was a degree of derogatory spieling, if you will, that went on, and even applied as far as taking things from other people and potentially harming them. Even that was considered to be justified. The Chachamim did say, though, that there may be a need to impose a limit. It's important, all of this is not simply intellectual. First of all, Purim is coming up, obviously, Motzei Shabbos and Sunday, and so anyone who's going to wear a costume should know why. Anyone who's going to participate in a spiel should know why we do this. But it's also important because there's a tight relationship between what goes on the original Purim and what we endure and what we go through today. Think about the parallels. The Jews then have experienced their almost redemption. Koresh, Cyrus, has said, you can come back to Israel. You can have your land. You can build your Beis HaMikdash. And then suddenly everything is halted. And everything is taken away, or seems to be taken away, and they're even under threat. Haman is decreeing that they're going to be killed. Before you then have this redemption that comes, and then they are able to resume building the Beis HaMikdash. And how different is that from a nation that in 1948 is granted the opportunity to come back and celebrates that they can come back to the land, and in Yerushalayim, you have, in 1967, you have Yerushalayim back, and we're able to go to the Kotel. It's this wonderful thing and this great high, and then suddenly we're stalled. And then you think about events, and even from this past week from Itamar, but in general, you think about the things that we go through, and there's a real risk of people being depressed and saying, you know what, it didn't get us anywhere, it didn't do anything, it was nothing. And what Zechariah warns about this, mibaz liyom katanot, for people to say, it was just nothing, it was small, there was nothing there. And so the imperative is all the greater, just as on Purim, we look at what we have, at what we can celebrate, and there's a mandate to increase our simcha, to increase our joy, so for us as well, to the extent that we can, while remembering what's been going on, still it's important for us to increase the simcha as well, to increase the joy and the recognition of our own geula, such as it has occurred until now, and ultimately may that lead to a day of la Yehudim ha'sa'ora, b'simcha, b'sason vikar.